Zakk Wylde was never supposed to survive. By every measure of rock and roll excess, by every statistic measuring the odds of a guitarist living through the lifestyle he chose, he should have been another cautionary tale whispered about in metal circles. Instead, he became something far more interesting. He became a man who looked directly into the abyss, saw exactly what was waiting for him there, and somehow found the strength to turn away. But that transformation did not come easily. It came through years of self-destruction, through moments when death seemed not just possible but inevitable, through a spiral so deep that even those closest to him had begun to lose hope. This is what really happened to Zakk Wylde. Born Jeffrey Philip Weidlach on January 14, 1967, in Jackson, New Jersey, Zakk's early years gave no indication of the chaos that would later consume his life. He grew up in a middle-class family, surrounded by stability and love. His parents were supportive of his musical ambitions from the beginning. His father introduced him to music, and by the time Zakk was a teenager, he had fallen completely under the spell of the guitar. He was not interested in casual playing or weekend hobbies. He wanted to master the instrument in ways that most musicians could never imagine. He practiced obsessively, learning everything he could from the legends who had come before him. Eddie Van Halen's revolutionary technique, Randy Rhoads' technical precision, and the raw emotional power of blues guitarists shaped his developing style. By his late teens, Zakk had already established himself as one of the most technically gifted young guitarists in the New Jersey metal scene. In the 1980s, Zakk played in various local bands, building his reputation slowly but steadily. He was hungry and ambitious, driven by a desire to prove himself on a larger stage. But the path to success was not a straight line. It was filled with rejection, dead-end gigs, and the constant struggle of trying to break through in an industry that was flooded with talented musicians all competing for the same limited opportunities. Zakk refused to give up. He continued to practice, continued to write, and continued to push himself harder than most people would consider sane. His dedication was absolute. His commitment to the craft was unwavering. He believed that if he worked hard enough, if he sacrificed enough, if he simply refused to accept failure, then eventually the break would come. That break arrived in 1987 when Ozzy Osbourne was searching for a new guitarist to replace Randy Rhoads, one of the most influential metal guitarists of all time. Zakk auditioned for the position. He was young, hungry, and possessed a technical ability that immediately impressed Osbourne and his management team. At 20 years old, Zakk Wylde joined one of the biggest bands in heavy metal history. He had finally made it. The dream that had sustained him through years of struggle was becoming reality. Joining Ozzy Osbourne's band was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Zakk had achieved what most guitarists only dreamed of. He was now part of a legendary band with a massive global fanbase. He would play stadiums instead of clubs. He would record albums that would be heard by millions. On the other hand, he had just inherited an impossible legacy. Randy Rhoads was not simply a guitarist who had played with Ozzy. He was a transformative force, a musician whose technical brilliance and emotional depth had redefined what was possible on the instrument. Zakk was stepping into those shoes, and everyone in the metal community was watching to see if he could measure up. The pressure was immense. But Zakk was not intimidated. He was confident in his abilities, perhaps to the point of arrogance, and that confidence served him well. His first album with Ozzy, No Rest for the Wicked, showed that while Zakk was different from Randy Rhoads, he was equally capable of delivering exceptional guitar work. Zakk brought his own style to the band, one that was rooted in blues but executed with technical precision and raw emotional power. The album was successful, and suddenly Zakk was being recognized as a major talent in his own right. He was in his early 20s and already one of the most respected guitarists in heavy metal. It should have been a moment of pure triumph. Instead, it was the beginning of a descent. As Zakk's career accelerated, so did his substance abuse. He had always experimented with drugs and alcohol, like many musicians in the metal scene, but now it became something darker. The touring schedule was relentless. The pressure to live up to expectations was constant. The access to unlimited quantities of drugs and alcohol was absolute. Zakk began to use more, to push harder, to test the limits of what his body could endure. What had started as recreational indulgence became a serious addiction that would consume the next several decades of his life. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, Zakk released multiple albums with Ozzy. No Rest for the Wicked, Just Say Ozzy, No More Tears, Diary of a Madman. The catalog was extensive and commercially successful. Zakk's guitar work became a signature element of Ozzy's sound. He was everywhere. He was touring constantly, recording prolifically, becoming more famous with each passing year. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But beneath the surface, Zakk was spiraling. The drugs were getting harder. The drinking was becoming more serious. The lifestyle that had seemed glamorous and exciting when he was younger was turning into something that was slowly killing him. Friends and family members began to express concern. Bandmates noticed the changes. But Zakk was not ready to listen. He was too caught up in the moment, too convinced that he could handle it, too addicted to the rush to care about the consequences. By the late 1990s, Zakk Wylde had become something of a cautionary tale within the metal community. He was still producing excellent guitar work, still capable of delivering memorable performances, but his personal life was in free fall. The addiction had evolved beyond simple substance abuse. It had become a way of life, a fundamental part of his identity. He would wake up hungover and use drugs to feel better. He would perform at night and use more drugs to come down from the adrenaline. The cycle was endless and inescapable. Stories began to circulate about his behavior. Tales of wild parties, of blackout drinking, of near-death experiences that somehow he managed to survive. Some of these stories were exaggerated by the rumor mill of the music industry, but many of them were true. Zakk was living dangerously, pushing himself further into darkness with each passing month. In 2003, Ozzy and Zakk parted ways. The split was not dramatic or acrimonious in the public sense, but privately, it represented a failure on Zakk's part to maintain control of his life. He had been given an incredible opportunity, an opportunity that most musicians would kill for, and he had allowed his addiction to compromise everything. Ozzy brought in other guitarists to complete the touring cycle. For Zakk, it was a moment of reckoning. He was no longer the young prodigy with unlimited potential. He was a 36-year-old guitarist with serious substance abuse issues and an uncertain future. The question that everyone was asking was whether he could recover, whether he could rebuild his career, whether he could simply survive. What happened next was unexpected. Rather than disappearing into the darkness completely, Zakk made a decision that would ultimately save his life. He decided to pursue a solo career. This was not a retreat from the spotlight. It was a reclamation of his identity as an artist. Zakk had always been more than just Ozzy's guitarist. He had his own musical vision, his own ideas about what heavy music could be. He began writing and recording solo material, creating albums that showcased his full range as a musician. Book of Shadows and later Book of Shadows 2 revealed a side of Zakk that had been hidden beneath years of touring and substance abuse. These albums were personal, introspective, and deeply emotional. They showed that Zakk was capable of creating meaningful art that went far beyond the spectacle of his work with Ozzy. But the solo career was not enough to address the fundamental issue that had been plaguing him for decades. The addiction was still there, still pulling at him, still threatening to destroy everything he was trying to rebuild. Zakk continued to struggle with drugs and alcohol throughout the 2000s. There were interventions from concerned friends and family members. There were periods of sobriety followed by relapses. There were hospital visits and near-death experiences. The battle was brutal and ongoing, with no clear victor in sight. What truly changed for Zakk Wylde came not from his own willpower alone but from an unexpected source. In 2009, he married Barbarella Sazes, a woman who would become the anchor that kept him grounded during his darkest moments. Barbarella was not a musician, not someone from the rock and roll world. She was an ordinary person with extraordinary strength and an unwavering belief that Zakk could overcome his demons. For the first time in decades, Zakk had someone in his life who loved him not because of his fame or his guitar skills, but simply because of who he was as a person. The marriage became a turning point, though the path forward was far from smooth. By this time, Zakk had 2 children with Barbarella. Fatherhood changed his perspective in ways that nothing else had been able to accomplish. Suddenly, the lifestyle that had seemed so essential to his identity began to feel selfish and destructive. He was not just hurting himself anymore. He was hurting the people he loved most in the world. His children deserved a father who was present, who was healthy, who was not constantly battling addiction. His wife deserved a husband who could actually be there for her, not someone who was perpetually consumed by substance abuse. These realizations did not instantly cure him of his addiction, but they gave him a reason to fight that was stronger than any reason he had possessed before. The battle with addiction is rarely a linear journey toward recovery. There are victories and setbacks, moments of hope followed by devastating relapses. Zakk experienced all of this. There were times when he seemed to be winning the fight, when sobriety appeared within reach. There were other times when the pull of addiction seemed overwhelming, when the desire to use felt stronger than his desire to stay clean. Throughout all of this, Barbarella remained by his side. She did not enable his addiction. She did not make excuses for his behavior. But she also did not abandon him when things were at their darkest. She believed in his capacity to change, and that belief eventually became powerful enough to transform him. By the early 2010s, Zakk had begun to stabilize his life in ways that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. He was still performing, still creating music, but on terms that felt healthier and more sustainable. He was touring less frequently, focusing more on his family, prioritizing his mental and physical health in ways that he had neglected for decades. The wild rock star persona that had defined him for so long began to fade, replaced by something more grounded, more mature, more genuinely at peace. He was not pretending to be sober or healthy. He was actually achieving these things, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. The transformation of Zakk Wylde from a man on the edge of self-destruction to someone who had genuinely rebuilt his life was not instantaneous or miraculous. It was gradual, painful, and required constant vigilance and work. But by the mid-2010s, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted. Zakk was still one of the most respected guitarists in heavy metal. He was still capable of delivering technically brilliant and emotionally powerful performances. But now he was doing it as a sober man, as a dedicated father and husband, as someone who understood the value of the second chance he had been given. In 2016, Zakk rejoined Ozzy Osbourne for a reunion tour and new album. The news shocked the metal community. Many people thought that chapter of his life was permanently closed. But Zakk had evolved in ways that made a reunion possible. He was not the same person who had left Ozzy's band in 2003. He was healthier, more mature, more grounded in his priorities. The reunion was successful, proving that Zakk could maintain his sobriety even while navigating the intense pressures of touring with one of rock and roll's most legendary frontmen. He had proven something to himself and to the world: recovery was possible, even for someone who had spiraled as deeply as he had. Throughout the late 2010s and into the 2020s, Zakk has continued to balance his responsibilities as a musician with his commitment to his family and his health. He tours regularly but not excessively. He records new material but takes time to be present with his wife and children. He speaks openly about his struggles with addiction, using his platform to help others who are fighting similar battles. This openness is significant because it breaks the silence that has traditionally surrounded addiction in the rock and roll world. For too long, musicians have suffered in private, ashamed to admit that they were losing battles with substances that were destroying them. Zakk's willingness to acknowledge his past and to discuss his recovery helps others understand that redemption is possible. Today, Zakk Wylde stands as one of the most respected guitarists in heavy metal history. His technical abilities remain undiminished by age or the decades he spent battling addiction. But what makes his story truly remarkable is not his guitar skills. It is the fact that he survived. He survived the excess, the addiction, and the self-destructive spiral that claims so many others. He survived because he found reasons to live that were stronger than his urge to use. He survived because someone loved him enough to believe in his capacity to change. He survived because he was ultimately willing to do the hard work of recovery. Zakk Wylde's legacy is not just the music he created or the technical innovations he brought to the guitar. It is the proof that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, when redemption appears impossible, transformation is still achievable. His journey from the brink of death to a life of genuine health and meaning is a testament to human resilience and the power of love, family, and the decision to choose life.